All right, here we go. This is Kinesiology 231. This is Module 5, and this is just a quick little overview of some of the things we talked about in the previous presentations and a little touch-up as well. When you look at what we have going on in terms of our assignments, with the book and lecture quiz, we're going to just touch up on a few things and a few bullet points that I started on in one presentation that I want to kind of wrap up here. Also, with Lab 7, I just want to get this out on the table for everybody. I understand we may have some constraints and people may not or might not have access to equipment. I get that. I would ask you to now go out and try to source information for non-equipment variations for muscular strength, muscular power, and muscular endurance, and just use those and submit those in those 3 domains as I mentioned, and then do your write-up on Blackboard as per what's already there. With the case study, I would definitely use the 8-1 positive negative format to help you. You know, you have the positive and negative risk factors for coronary vascular disease, and use that format and use that and lay it out. You can put that right into Blackboard and it makes life easier for both of us, and then you can extrapolate your results from that. And then with the discussion board, I'm just looking for you to encapsulate some of the findings that you've had so far with your different programs, with your different testing. And are there any glaring areas that maybe you need to work on, or you're particularly strong in other areas? Got it? All right, so I used this example in class where we had Antoine and Sully, and both were athletes of mine at one point. And when you look at it, one of them, as we talked about, had a greater absolute strength, meaning the maximal amount of weight that he can move regardless of body weight. And then the other side of that equation is he also, meaning Antoine, had a higher relative strength as compared to Sully, and that was evaluated in terms of pound for pound. You recall the weight difference from each one was pretty pronounced, and then also their ability to push weight was actually pretty pronounced as well. And you had Antoine, who was a senior, and Sully was a freshman, and one had multiple years of training and the other was just starting to work out. So now you're left with these discussions in terms of how do you manage that in terms of programming. Well, when I coached them, what I ended up doing is I took the test outs for my athletes as a team and then by position, and I broke them out for 3 main exercises: bench, squat, and power clean. And with the distributions on these, we were able to see that you had some individuals who were underperforming and others who were very much overperforming, if you think of the 2 people that I brought up here. So when you look at this, instead of doing a 12-week or 13-week program where you're taking somebody from 12 reps all the way down to 1, which is pretty darn aggressive in terms of training, what we did is we broke up our athletes into different levels. So you have Sully, who needed more volume, needed more practice, needed more repetitions to be able to get his body just adapted to the rigors of training. Level 1, and he never saw 1 or 2 reps during that first 12-week mesocycle. But Antoine, on the other hand, he was level 4 all day long. He was pound for pound stronger, and he was on an absolute scale way stronger than most of the athletes as well. So to that end, Antoine never saw high volume. And that was because we didn't want to overly tax him in terms of training. And as you'll see, we'll talk about a little bit about downloads as well. But we also had to do some other things for him to accommodate his very athletic capabilities, to say the least. So when you look at this also, the power clean complex is a little different animal. Like in level 1, you probably won't see too much power clean. It's more of the ancillary exercises to teach power clean movement. But when you get into these ranges, you have to understand, because of the central nervous system component, that you have the high demands of the central nervous system, for power clean, that usually the rep ranges are actually ratcheted down a little bit. So you might do 1 to 4 or 5. When you're in the higher volume stuff, you might go 8 as a max, and I wouldn't go much beyond that for like a power clean. So when you see people in these different competitions and they're doing like 20 power cleans, it's like, holy smokes, you're not really doing power cleans anymore. You're doing more like endurance cleans or muscle cleans. All right, so let's take this out to this. When you look at percentage of weight moved and also the repetition relationship, you have overall, as intensity increases, we know the number of reps have to decrease. And this just makes sense, right? Because we know that you can't run a 100-meter race a pace of 100 meters over a marathon, or can a person move 100% of their max for 10 reps? If that were so, and they took a weight and they moved it for 10, if not actually 100%, we know it's closer to 70% of their 1 rep max. So to that end, how this actually looks over time is a little bit more like this. The intensity side of it and the rep side of it are not straight line, but actually they have this type of slope. It's positive overall or negative overall, but you'll see these kind of dips, sawtooth look to it. And what's happening is over time, we still are increasing the intensity and we are on the aggregate decreasing the reps, the overall volume. But what you'll see here is you'll see different areas where we download, like in week 5 for Sully, we might download the reps. Instead of 3 sets of 10 or 4 sets of 10, it becomes 2 sets of 10 to allow a little bit of recovery. And same thing with the intensity. Instead of doing maybe at week 10, when we download, instead of doing three reps at 90, we might do 3 reps at 80% to allow the body to recover a little bit. We're still teaching the body how to be explosive over 3 reps, right? Because it's still on that rep range. We're teaching more like on that neural side, but we're allowing recovery over the scope of a 12-week program. Now, I will say this, as I mentioned earlier, to take somebody over what is maybe a 10 or 12-week program and take them from 12 reps down to 1 rep to a test out, that would be very aggressive. And that's where that leveling concept comes in. You can just imagine, right? You have this leveling range where you have over the course of 12 weeks, it might take them down to 6. And we can calculate a 1 rep max from that. And you might have your level 2 person where we take them down to maybe 4s. And then your level 3 person where we take them down to 3s. And then your level 4 person where we take them all the way down to 1s and a test out. So you can now, in essence, take a much aggressive approach, if you will, or what we viewed as aggressive approach over 12 weeks, subdivide it into different categories and allow your athletes to be able to progress over one mesocycle, level 1, to another mesocycle, level 2, to another mesocycle, level 3, to another mesocycle, level 4, instead of expecting them to go from sets of 12 all the way down to sets of 1, which is not prepping them correctly. So with this, the rep and loading parameters are vastly different for like a level 1 to a level 4. And I would contest when we look at this over the course of maybe a 12-week mesocycle here, if we look at these and we go, here's our intensity, here are our reps, we have 3 sets of 10 at 70, here's our rep range, here's our rep range, I would contest that even at 30 reps, 30 reps, 30 reps, 30 reps, if you calculate it out and at these percentages, we could plot this anywhere and say, this is a pretty dang hard workout. And so to that end, when we get back to this gentleman down here, and we get back to this conversation yet again of what is hard and what is easy, when you look at this, I would contest that 3 sets of 10 at 70% versus a 10, an 8, a 6, a 4, a 2 at these percentages are probably going to be on the order of an 8. Same thing with 5 sets of 6, or when you have 3 sets of 8 and 1 set of 6, all 30 reps, but I'm telling you, it's going to be like about an 8. They're all pretty darn hard. What happens is when you get into, when you get into your download weeks, like we saw here and here, that's where the scale shifts. And no longer are we in a hard type of workout, but we might be like a 4 or a 5 at that point. So to that end, what happens is this, it allows a little bit of recovery. But more to the point, this kind of gives us a graphical interpretation of what can actually be an 8, a hard workout, or what can be maybe a somewhat easy workout to allow recovery. And that's really the crux of what's going on with this omni-resistance exercise scale. It's a little bit of an RPE, but I'll tell you from a programming standpoint, as you place load on your athletes or place load on your clients going forward, you can undulate that training load, whether it's through the reps or the intensity, to elicit a different training response. Now, I can tell you, like with Antoine, we had to do some very creative things. We had to do some creative things in terms of how we undulated downloads for bench, for squat, for power clean, to allow different areas of recovery as we went through a 12-week mesocycle. It wasn't just week 5 and week 10. We had to make it a point to have that undulate between the different exercises, and that, if you think of it in terms of us applying a stimulus to the human organism, now we're allowing the human organism to recover in different areas within the training program. So let's take a look at the Nomogram next. So with the Nomogram, when you look at this, in the book, On page 260, you have kilograms up top and pounds on the bottom. We're going to be focused on the pound side of it. So when you look at this, you'll use this for one of your questions. If you have a person who does a 5-rep max, and they do that 5-rep max at, say, 200 pounds, well, you have to now go ahead and go 5-rep max at 200 pounds and kind of interpret that and extrapolate that over to be somewhere between 230 and 240, so it might be 235. Now, this test question that I created, I put it within a range, so you'll see it's pretty well defined as within that range. So you have to be able to correlate the one side to the other with this. And now the other part of this equation is you got to pick the right nomogram, bench or back squat, or leg press, right? So when you get in the book, you'll see the headers for each one of these. All right, guys, so with that, I'm gonna go ahead and sign off here. Have a good one. Email with questions.